Abandoned dog refuses to let go of her blanket, and what happened next left everyone in shock. Picture this: Aurora, a lively dog, running through the house, her tail wagging enthusiastically whenever she heard her family's footsteps. Aurora was the kind of dog who believed the world began and ended with the people she loved. To her, they were everything. And why wouldn't they be? From the time she was a puppy, Aurora had been treated as part of the family, or at least that's what it seemed. But then came that day, New Year's Eve, and something felt different. The house was filled with boxes, and people rushed around, loading things into the car. Aurora, clueless about what was happening, watched them with her wagging tail, trying to figure out what was going on. Is it a trip? Are they taking me with them? She might have thought. After all, she was part of the family, right? What Aurora didn't know was what was about to happen. When everything was packed, the boxes loaded into the car, and the house emptied, came the cruelest part. They closed the door. Not for everyone, just for her. Aurora was left outside, confused, her head tilted as she watched the car. The engine started, and still, she didn't move. They'll come back, it's just a mistake, a distraction, she seemed to think. But the car drove away, and Aurora was left there, alone. The only thing they left behind was an old, dirty blanket that had been her bed. At that moment, Aurora didn't understand. She stayed there, sitting by the door, waiting. Night fell, the cold set in, and she was still there, her eyes fixed on the entrance, as if she believed the door would open any moment and her family would appear. An empty stomach? That didn't matter. The biting wind? That didn't matter either. Aurora just wanted to go back inside, to the place where she felt safe and loved, but that never happened. Days went by, and Aurora began to realize no one was coming back. Still, she didn't leave the house. Whenever someone passed by, she would look at them with those eyes that seemed to plead, "Have you seen my family? Are they coming back?" But no one stopped. People only glanced from afar, some with pity, others not even that. The blanket they left behind became everything to her. It was as if that piece of fabric was the last memory of what she believed was love. She carried it wherever she went, as if it were the only thing that brought her a little comfort. It was the only scent of the home she knew, the only piece of life she had left. Aurora began to waste away. Her thin body, sad eyes, and dirty fur spoke of the days spent lying on the dirt in front of the house. But what was most remarkable? She still had hope. Even when it seemed impossible, she kept hoping. That hope was what kept her there, holding on to the idea that somehow things would get better. Aurora didn't know it yet, but her abandonment was just the beginning of a long and painful journey. A journey full of heartache, but also discoveries and, perhaps, a second chance. It was pouring rain that day, one of those storms that seemed to sweep everything away. Maya was in her car, driving carefully to avoid losing control on the wet road. She had just left the animal shelter where she volunteered, and despite being tired, something inside her told her to stay alert on that drive. The rain pounded against the windshield, and the headlights barely illuminated the road. Then, suddenly, something caught Maya's attention. On the other side of the road, amidst the mud, was a motionless figure. At first, she thought it was a garbage bag, but then she saw movement, a slight tremor. It was a dog. Maya pulled over to the side of the road, concerned, and got out with an umbrella, even though she knew she'd likely get soaked. There was Aurora, curled up, shivering, her fur matted from the rain. But it wasn't her condition that broke Maya's heart. What truly moved her was the way Aurora was clutching something with her paws. It was an old, dirty blanket. Even in the middle of the storm, Aurora held on to that piece of fabric as if it were the most important thing in the world. And to her, it was. It was all she had left of a life that had been ripped away from her. Maya approached cautiously. "Hey, girl, it's okay, I'm here to help you," she said in the softest voice she could muster. But Aurora didn't trust her. She lifted her head and let out a low growl, clutching the blanket even tighter, as if Maya might take it away. Aurora's eyes were filled with fear, but also something even more heartbreaking, mistrust. It was as if she was saying, "I don't know if I can trust anyone anymore." Still, Maya didn't give up. Her experience rescuing animals had taught her that sometimes patience is the greatest act of love. She crouched down to Aurora's level and opened the backpack she always carried in her car. Inside was a dog food bar she kept for emergencies. Maya placed the bar on the ground a few steps away from Aurora and backed off, giving her space. Aurora hesitated. She looked at Maya, then at the food. She was starving, but her fear was still stronger than her hunger. The rain continued to fall, and Maya, now without her umbrella, stayed there, kneeling in the mud, waiting. Without making any sudden movements, she hoped Aurora would realize she wasn't there to hurt her. After a few minutes that felt like an eternity, Aurora took a step. Just one. She grabbed the food and quickly retreated to her blanket, as if it were a trap. Maya seized the opportunity. "Good girl, you're so brave," she said, as she moved a little closer, always slowly. This time, Aurora didn't growl, but she was still on high alert. Then Maya noticed something even more heartbreaking. Aurora's neck was injured, with a nasty cut that looked like it had been caused by something tight. A collar, perhaps. It was clear that this dog had been through horrible things. Maya felt a wave of sadness and anger at the same time. "Who could do this to you?" she thought. Finally, after much patience, Aurora allowed Maya to get closer. It wasn't easy, but it was a moment of victory. Maya reached out and gently touched Aurora's head. Aurora trembled with fear but didn't run. It was as if, for a brief moment, she was willing to give someone a chance. Maya wrapped Aurora in the blanket and picked her up, even though she knew Aurora still didn't fully trust her. When Maya placed Aurora in the back seat of the car, she saw something different in her eyes. It wasn't exactly trust, but perhaps a spark of hope. As if, for the first time in a long while, Aurora had found someone who genuinely wanted to help her. The drive to the veterinary clinic was silent, except for the sound of rain hitting the car roof. Aurora, drenched and scared, clung tightly to her blanket as if it were her anchor in an uncertain world. Maya, on the other hand, drove with a mix of worry and determination. She knew Aurora's fight was only beginning, but deep down, she felt things were about to change for the better. Aurora was no longer alone. Before we continue, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel if you love animals and enjoy hearing their heartwarming stories. When they arrived at the veterinary clinic, Maya parked the car and sat still for a moment, taking a deep breath. She looked into the back seat and saw Aurora still wrapped in her blanket, less tense now but clearly not understanding what was happening. "It's going to be okay, girl. I promise," Maya said, trying to reassure her. But inside, she was filled with doubts. Aurora was so fragile, so hurt. Would there be enough time to save her? As Maya carried Aurora into the clinic, the staff immediately recognized the severity of the situation. Aurora's fur was wet, matted, and filthy, but what stood out the most was the wound on her neck. It was a deep cut, as if something too tight had been there for far too long, likely a collar that hadn't been adjusted as she grew. The wound was infected, and the smell was strong. Maya felt a lump in her throat. How could someone be so cruel? The veterinarian, Dr. Ricardo, arrived quickly. He was experienced and had seen many difficult cases, but he was visibly moved when he saw Aurora. "This little one's been through a lot, hasn't she?" he said as he examined the wound. "We'll take care of this, but it's going to be a fight." His words were serious, but there was a glimmer of hope in his tone. Aurora was nervous, trembling with fear. Every time someone got close, she growled softly, trying to protect herself. It wasn't aggression, it was pure terror. Maya stayed by her side the entire time, holding the blanket that Aurora clung to so dearly. As the vet prepared his instruments, Maya whispered to Aurora, "I'm here. No one's going to hurt you anymore, I promise." Aurora looked at Maya for a moment, as if trying to believe her, but she wasn't sure yet. The treatment began with a general exam. Aurora was malnourished, clearly having gone hungry for a long time. Her bones were visible beneath her fur. She also had signs of older injuries, indicating that her life before abandonment had been far from easy. Dr. Ricardo explained that the neck wound was serious and that without surgery, the infection could spread and endanger her life. "She's strong, but she needs a chance," he said, looking at Maya. "We'll do the surgery right away." Maya agreed immediately. There was no time to waste. Her heart raced as she watched the team prepare Aurora for the procedure. When they took Aurora into the operating room, Maya was left alone in the waiting area. The silence was unbearable. She held Aurora's blanket in her hands and couldn't hold back her tears. All this dog had was an old piece of fabric and a lifetime of scars, both on her body and in her soul. "You're going to get through this, Aurora. You're strong. Stronger than anyone knows," Maya thought, as if her silent words could reach Aurora in the operating room. The surgery was long. The wound was deeper than it appeared, and the infection had spread. Dr. Ricardo and his team worked tirelessly, cleaning the area, removing damaged tissue, and carefully suturing the wound. When they finally finished, Ricardo came out to speak with Maya. "She was amazing. She fought the whole time. Now we just have to wait, but I'm optimistic. This little one has an incredible will to live." Aurora was moved to the recovery room, still under the effects of anesthesia. Maya went in and saw the small fighter lying there, a bandage on her neck and a warm blanket covering her thin body. Even so, Maya noticed Aurora was still searching for something. "The blanket," she thought. Quickly, Maya grabbed the piece of fabric and placed it beside her. Aurora, even in her drowsy state, moved her paw to hold onto it, just as she always did. The sight melted Maya's heart. The following days were full of intensive care. Aurora needed antibiotics, a strengthened diet, and a lot of patience. The wound on her neck began to heal, but the mistrust in her eyes was a constant reminder of all she had endured. Maya spent as much time as possible by her side, speaking in a calm and loving voice, trying to show Aurora that this time no one would abandon her. Day by day, Aurora showed small signs of improvement. She began eating a little more, lifting her head when Maya entered the room, and eventually even allowed others to touch her. It was as if she was slowly accepting that maybe, just maybe, she could trust humans again. The veterinary treatment saved Aurora's life, but the fight was far from over. However, in that moment, Maya knew she had made the right choice. Aurora was a fighter, and now she had someone fighting by her side. Aurora was safe, but her battle was not yet won. After the surgery, she was transferred to the shelter where Maya volunteered. It was a simple place, but filled with people who truly cared for animals. For Aurora, who had only known abandonment and pain, this environment was entirely new. The fight now was not just to heal her body but also to mend her soul. On her first day at the shelter, Aurora was still fragile. She was placed in a quiet space with a clean bed, fresh food, and, of course, her old, worn blanket. Maya made sure to put it right next to her, as if it were a kind of talisman that helped Aurora feel safe. Even in her weakened state, Aurora didn't let go of the blanket. It was as if that small piece of fabric was her connection to the past, no matter how painful it had been. Maya spent hours by her side, talking and showing her that she was now in a safe place. "Aurora, no one here will hurt you. I promise you'll never go hungry, cold, or be in pain again." At first, Aurora just lay there quietly, watching Maya with those doubtful eyes, as if she wanted to believe her but was too afraid of being let down again. As the days passed, Aurora began to adjust to the shelter's routine. Every day, Maya hand-fed her, as Aurora was still too insecure to eat on her own. Maya's constant care slowly started breaking down the walls Aurora had built around herself. Little by little, Aurora grew stronger, and her expression began to change. There was still fear, but now there was also a hint of curiosity. At the shelter, there were other dogs who, like Aurora, had experienced difficult situations. At first, she didn't want to interact with them. She stayed in her corner, clinging to her blanket as if to say, "I'm not ready yet." But the other dogs were patient. Some would pass by, sniff her, and move on without insisting, as if they understood that Aurora needed time. One day, something incredible happened. Aurora stood up and took her first steps out of her bed since arriving at the shelter. Maya was nearby and could barely hold back her tears of joy. Aurora slowly walked over to a water bowl and started drinking on her own. It was a small act, but it meant so much. It was as if Aurora was starting to believe she could begin again. Her interaction with the other dogs also improved. At first, she watched them from a distance. Then, she cautiously came closer. Eventually, a playful puppy started tugging on her blanket, as if inviting her to play. Normally, Aurora would have pulled away, but this time she surprised everyone by letting him stay nearby. It was the first time she seemed to relax, even just a little. With time, Aurora began to participate in shelter activities. Maya celebrated every small achievement as if it were a huge victory. When Aurora agreed to step out into the yard for the first time, Maya was there, beaming with pride, taking photos, and celebrating as if it were a party. Every step Aurora took was a reason to celebrate. Despite her progress, there were still hard days. Sometimes Aurora would have nightmares and wake up scared, whimpering and searching for her blanket. In those moments, Maya was always nearby, ready to comfort her. "You're strong, Aurora. You've already been through the worst. Now it's just about moving forward, and I'll be here with you." The shelter wasn't a permanent home, but it was exactly what Aurora needed at that moment, a place where she could heal, both physically and emotionally, surrounded by love and care. Maya knew there was still a long road ahead, but seeing Aurora begin to trust people and other dogs again, she was certain they were on the right path. Aurora was no longer the dog abandoned in the rain. She was starting to realize that, even after everything she'd been through, there was still room for something new. And for the first time in a long while, she seemed to believe it too. Aurora was changing. Slowly, she was leaving behind the fearful dog who huddled in the corner and starting to explore the world around her. Everyone at the shelter loved watching her progress. Maya, especially, felt proud of every little milestone Aurora achieved. But no one expected the past to come knocking. One day, while Maya was checking the shelter's social media, a message caught her attention. It was from a man claiming to be Aurora's former owner. He had seen the dog story, which had gone viral online, and said he wanted answers. Maya was shocked. Why did he abandon her? Why is he only coming forward now? The message said he wanted to see her, that he felt remorse for what had happened. Maya didn't know what to think, but she decided to give the man a chance. She knew Aurora needed to close that chapter of her life, and facing her past might be part of the process. A few days later, he showed up at the shelter. When Aurora saw him, something strange happened. She froze, staring at him, but didn't show any excitement. He approached, saying, "Aurora, it's me. Do you remember me?" The man explained that he had been going through financial difficulties, which led him to abandon Aurora. He said he thought someone would find her and take care of her. Maya listened patiently, but inside, she was furious. How could anyone justify abandoning such a defenseless creature? Aurora, on the other hand, showed no emotion. When he tried to touch her, she backed away, hiding behind Maya. That made it clear to everyone, Aurora had chosen to leave the past behind. The man left, but Maya knew something more needed to be done to give Aurora a fresh start. That's when Jonathan came into the picture. Jonathan was a man who had recently suffered a great loss. His dog, Vento, had passed away after years of companionship. Jonathan had a son, Josh, who was recovering from a serious accident. Josh was sad, withdrawn, and hadn't left his room since the accident. When Jonathan saw Aurora's story online, he felt something special. He thought that just as he and Josh needed something to fill the void, Aurora might need a new chance too. When Jonathan arrived at the shelter with Josh, Aurora was lying in the yard, basking in the sun. Maya introduced them carefully, knowing Aurora still had her reservations. Jonathan approached slowly, respecting her space, while Josh, even in his wheelchair, watched curiously. Aurora looked at them, hesitant at first, but something changed when Josh held out his hand with a small piece of food. Aurora hesitated but, slowly, walked over to him and accepted the offering. It was a simple moment, but it was full of meaning. Josh began to smile, something Jonathan and Maya hadn't seen in a long time. Aurora, on the other hand, seemed less tense, as if she sensed that these two carried their own pain as well. Maya, watching from a distance, knew this was the beginning of something special. Aurora and Josh had connected, not through words, but through something deeper, shared pain and a desire to heal. Jonathan decided right then and there to adopt Aurora. He knew that, just like Josh, Aurora needed a family to start over. When he brought her home, something magical began to happen. Josh, who used to spend hours in his room, started coming out to play with Aurora. He laughed at her antics, and Aurora seemed to understand that her role was to help. Day by day, Josh showed signs of improvement, both emotionally and physically. Aurora, once abandoned, now had a purpose. She had found a new family, and this time it was a family that would never leave her behind. Maya, moved to tears, knew she had made the right choice. Aurora had closed the door on her past and was now ready to move forward, stronger and more loved than ever. Josh had never felt so alive since the accident. Before Aurora arrived, he spent his days sitting in his wheelchair, staring out the window, trapped in sadness and the feeling that his life would never be the same. Jonathan tried everything to cheer him up, but it seemed impossible. Then Aurora entered their lives, bringing something no one expected: hope. From her first day in the house, Aurora seemed to understand that Josh needed her. She stayed by his side, lying on the floor, looking at him with those eyes that seemed to say, "You're not alone." Aurora wasn't just a dog, she was a friend, an ally. She knew exactly when to approach and when to simply be there, offering her presence as comfort. Josh, who had avoided interaction before, began to open up. At first, it was small gestures. He would toss a ball for Aurora, who always brought it back, wagging her tail with such joy that Josh couldn't help but smile. Each day, he seemed more willing. "Aurora, you're amazing," he would say while petting her fur. Over time, Aurora became an essential part of Josh's recovery. Whenever he did his physical therapy exercises, Aurora was there, as if cheering for every movement he made. When Josh tried to stand up on his own for the first time, Aurora stayed close, following his every effort. It was almost as if she knew how important that moment was. And when he succeeded, even if only for a few seconds, Aurora celebrated with excited licks and happy jumps. Jonathan couldn't believe the transformation in his son. He saw Josh smile, heard his laughter as he played with Aurora, and felt immense relief in his heart. "This dog saved my son," he thought. Aurora wasn't just a companion to Josh, she was the strength he needed to believe he could still live a life full of joy. The bond between the two was so strong that even the doctors noticed the difference. Josh was more confident, more motivated, and slowly regaining his mobility. What once seemed impossible was now real, and Aurora was there, by his side, every step of the way, both literally and emotionally. Aurora had also changed. Once full of fear and insecurity, she now seemed like a completely different dog. Being with Josh gave her a purpose. She no longer needed her blanket to feel safe. Now, her security was in the boy she loved so deeply. The two completed each other, like pieces of a puzzle that had finally found their place. Over time, Aurora became more than just a source of support for Josh. She became an inspiration to everyone who knew their story. In the neighborhood, people talked about how this boy and his dog had overcome so many challenges together. It was impossible not to be moved when watching them run around the yard, playing as if nothing in the world could stop them. Josh still had a long road ahead, but with Aurora by his side, he knew he could face anything. Her strength had become his strength, and the connection between them was living proof that love, even from an animal, has the power to heal the deepest wounds. Aurora and Josh proved something many people forget. Even in the hardest moments, when it feels like the world has crumbled, it's possible to find the strength to start over. Their story wasn't just about individual resilience, it was about how the union of two broken souls could create something powerful and transformative. Aurora, who was once abandoned with only an old blanket as a reminder of a home, now ran happily beside Josh, free of fear and distrust. She showed that, despite everything she had been through, pain does not define who you are. The abandonment, the wounds, the fear, all of it was in the past. What mattered was the present and how she chose to live it, with courage, love, and renewed trust. Josh, in turn, learned a life-changing lesson from Aurora. He saw, in the eyes of that dog, the determination to keep moving forward, even when everything seemed lost. Aurora never gave up, and that inspired Josh to do the same. Every step he took, every achievement, no matter how small, was celebrated by Aurora as if it were the greatest accomplishment in the world. To her, Josh was a hero. And, over time, he began to believe it too. The bond between the two became an example of resilience. Aurora, who once trembled with fear and wouldn't let anyone near her, was now the first to trust. And Josh, who thought his life would never be the same, now believed he could do anything. Together, they showed that love can heal even the deepest wounds. Aurora's transformation also impacted everyone around her. Maya, who had witnessed every step of the journey, saw in Aurora's strength a clear message: it's never too late to start over. No matter how far you've fallen, there is always a chance to rise again. Aurora isn't just a dog, Maya would say with emotion. She's a living example of how life can surprise us. Josh, now stronger and more confident, began helping others too. He and Aurora started visiting hospitals, bringing hope to children facing tough times. Josh knew better than anyone how much Aurora's presence could change everything. Seeing the smiles on the children's faces felt like giving back for all that Aurora had done for him. The lesson from Aurora and Josh goes beyond words. They showed that even when life knocks you down, it's possible to find strength in connections, in love, and in the will to move forward. Aurora, who once clung to her blanket as her only source of security, now held on to something much greater: the hearts of everyone who had the privilege of knowing her story. This is true resilience. It's not just about surviving, but about transforming pain into strength, fear into courage, and abandonment into a new chance to live, love, and inspire. Aurora and Josh are proof that, together, we can overcome anything. Thank you so much for watching the video until the end. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment sharing your thoughts on this story.